as everyone within the sex camp continued to celebrate their victory over the army of undead. Xiao Honglian, however, remained alert and energetic after allowing herself a brief moment of respite. Then, she said to her soldiers that they couldn't afford to be complacent now. They couldn't relax leisurely. Everyone can sit down and rest for the time being, but also be prepared for battle at any time. There may still be remnants of the zombies and the giant rats. She reminded her men, and several other forces followed suit as well. This made almost every soldier so alert that they didn't even dare to relax completely when they rested. Meanwhile, at this time on the rooftop, Zhang Yi and Zhou Qi were sharing a tight and loving embrace. Being tightly hugged by Zhang Yi, Zhou Qi only dared to breathe deeply, with her chest rising and falling violently. And Zhang Yi felt this very clearly. So, as they got up and looked below at the entire battlefield, they saw that many soldiers had dazed eyes, celebrating their victory. And although this battle would definitely leave many of them and several others with unforgettable memories for a lifetime, Zhang Yi hoped they won't be troubled by these memories in the future. At that moment, Liang Yu, Uncle Yu, Chunlei and Flower gathered around Zhang Yi. The three of them kept in mind his instructions about exerting their strength, but at the same time, conserving their energy so that they could escape at any moment notice. And this led to no injuries in their team. Although it wasn't easy for any of them to still be alive, it was also nothing short than a miracle. However, the same couldn't be said for the rest. Uncle Yu gave an assessment of the current conditions of the other forces. The casualties of the coalition soldiers are around 80% as of now, and the combat effectiveness of the entire Tianhai city has been completely decimated in real time after this battle. In comparison to other cities, the losses could not be simply described as tragic, but this tragedy also couldn't be compared to the casualties the Snow Worship sect were facing. And this is predominantly due to the fact that the war took place within their territory. There were about 5,000 followers hiding within a couple high-rise buildings, and the St. John's Cathedral Church before the battle, and this didn't even include their combat believers. But as of now, there are less than 500 followers of the Snow Worship sect left, and the majority of the sporadic crying sounds around the camp were them. However, this was not a bad thing for Zhang Yi. At least there were no casualties in his team in this battle. Then, Zhou Qi's voice suddenly came to his ears. Zhang Yi, are you injured? Do you want me to help you? Zhang Yi looked at the gentle female doctor next to him, and he couldn't help but laugh slightly. No, I'm fine. Zhou Qi then asked the others, and everyone replied that they were fine. At this moment on the battlefield, every second was extremely long for everyone. And with so many people lost, people's most basic emotions of joy, anger, sorrow and happiness could immediately shift from one to the other within a short time. Zhou Qi tightened the strap of her medical box and asked Zhang Yi, "Can I go and see their injuries?" The ones she was referring to were naturally the survivors on the battlefield. At this time, although many people were alive, they had varying degrees of injuries. Zhang Yi did not refuse. At least now they are in the same camp. Moreover, after this battle, these major forces in Tianhai City will hardly form a large scale, let alone pose a threat to them. It was even possible that they will form an alliance to deal with the crisis they may face in the future. Zhou Qi carried a medical box on her back, looking for the wounded on the battlefield, bandaging their wounds and injecting them with medicine. Her serious look and gentle and skillful technique made many numb soldiers burst into tears. They felt the warmth of people in Zhou Qi. This made them feel that they were still alive, not in hell. One after another, each base began to distribute their own supplies. Food, medicine, bandages, blankets, and military coats. Although everyone was still afraid to get some rest, they could basically conclude that the zombies would not come back, so they had to let the wounded rest first. Yuan Kongya walked out with other high-level sect leaders and a few survivors she protected in the church. And although there were some minor incidents, no one was severely injured or killed. There have been many injured warriors, and they all seems to need your medical care. Yuan Kongya said this to Zhou Qi as she looked around the battlefield with compassion in her eyes. Li Jian and his wife were among the survivors. So as they also looked around the battlefield in front of them, they felt sad and had extremely painful look in their eyes. Most of the neighbors Li Jian brought to the sect had died in this zombie crisis, especially this recent zombie attack. Li Jian inevitably had a look of self-blame on his face. Zhang Jianfang comforted him. Don't be too sad, you have tried your best. In such an era, we can only survive day by day. It's not your fault. Li Jian sighed helplessly and walked over to help those who could still move, and carry the wounded and help take care of them. He also helped others carry the stretcher for the wounded. Su Beibei was also active on the battlefield, bandaging the wounded and bringing them hot water to keep them warm. After a long time, Bian Junwu and his team arrived. The 7 people looked a little embarrassed, not as calm and composed as before. Bailey Chongqing supported Wu Di. Wu Di, who used to be arrogant, now had a pale face and his feet seemed to have no strength. Kong Shang, their reinforcement ability user, had a bandage on his shoulder and one of his arms was twisted into a knot. He was obviously seriously injured in the battle. The 7 people had undoubtedly faced unimaginable problems during their operation underground, and their injuries were of varying severity. But they had a relaxed smile on their faces. Obviously, their decapitation operation were not easier than those of Zhang Yi and his team, but they succeeded. The investigation team came to the sex camp. Bian Junwu glanced at the people who were still alive at the scene, without much expression on his face. They won a tragic victory in this battle. Everyone tried their best and it was not easy at all. There was no need to say extra words of comfort. Zhang Yi walked over and asked Bian Junwu, "Have all the zombie kings been killed?" Bian Junwu still replied coldly, "There were 5 in total. All of them were killed by us. The bodies are in the car." "That's good." After getting Bian Junwu's affirmative answer, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. After losing the command of the Zombie King, no matter how many zombies are left in Tianhai City, they are just a mess. At least there is no need to worry about their large-scale activities like before. Then it will be easy to deal with them one by one. Zhang Yi thought about it, took out a few portions of supernatural food from his alternate space and handed them to Bian Junwu. "What is this?" Bian Junwu's tone revealed curiosity. "This is food made by a mutant friend of mine, and it can help people restore their supernatural powers, physical strength, and mental state. It's very useful." Zhang Yi smiled. Bian Junwu heard this and also showed a barely perceptible smile, but his smile was ugly. "It seems that you have a very good mutant with auxiliary functions." He took the food from Zhang Yi without being polite, and then returned to their modified van with his team members. A few days later, the zombies in Tianhai City were temporarily eliminated. Except for Zhang Yi's team, all other forces in the Temporal Alliance were almost destroyed. The forces sympathized with each other, and Zhang Yi and his team became the key targets in winning over. Xiao Honglian was the first to run over and express friendship with Zhang Yi. "Zhang Yi, although there was some unpleasantness between us in the past, but now Tianhai City is in tatters, and it's hard to say whether there are 10,000 living people. Can we be friends in the future? We can't afford the cost of war. If you need me, please just ask." Xiao Honglian extended her hand to Zhang Yi. The way Xiao Honglian commanded her army to fight bravely on the battlefield left a deep impression on Zhang Yi. Unlike the women around Zhang Yi, she was a very capable woman. Anyway, Zhang Yi is a peace-loving person. If someone takes the initiative to come to show goodwill, he will certainly not refuse. Although there have been wars before, they were just for the competition for resources and did not involve personal grudges. So Zhang Yi shook hands with her and said with a smile, "I have always admired you for being able to lead a large force as a woman." He asked curiously, "I see that you are very skilled. Have you worked in the army or the police system before?" Xiao Honglian smiled faintly. "I used to be a superintendent in the criminal police team of the city's police department." Zhang Yi gave a thumbs up and said playfully, "Sure enough, a heroine." He then looked at Xiao Honglian with a devious smile and said, "Doesn't that mean that you have the information of each of us?" Xiao Honglian said generously, "Of course, I have all your basic personal information, but that is only limited to before the end of the world." And with that, she took her leave. Zhang Yi watched her, wondering if Xiao Honglian could really help him find some personal information about some people of the Snow Worship sect. After Xiao Honglian left, someone suddenly grabbed Zhang Yi's shoulder from behind. Not knowing who, Zhang Yi immediately grabbed the hand on his shoulder and was about to flip the person over when Wei Dinghai spoke up in pain. "Ouch, brother Zhang." Zhang Yi halted his actions and nervously asked what Wei Dinghai was doing trying to sneak up on him. Wei Dinghai moved his arm around to alleviate the brief pain he just experienced on his shoulder, then asked Zhang Yi if he was interested in going out to sea. "If you have time, I can take you overseas to explore. There is a vast world there," Wei Dinghai invited enthusiastically. Zhang Yi thought of the vast sea and couldn't help but feel a little fascinated. But thinking that there might be more dangerous creatures under the vast ocean than on land, he shook his head decisively as he began to tremble while clenching his teeth uncontrollably. "Compared to that, it would be more practical for you to give me some seafood." Wei Dinghai laughed and said, "That's easy. Next time we go out to sea, we'll bring you the freshest frozen seafood. It is impossible to count on live fish. Only deep-sea fish can survive in the deep sea now, and they will die once they are caught." Zhang Yi then asked, "So many people died this time. Is it convenient to go out to sea?" The smile on Wei Dinghai's face faded a little. He lowered his head and sighed softly. "Most of the combatants died, but I still have some staff on the ship. With them, I can still go out to sea. Wei Dinghai then expressed the same idea as Xiao Honglian. Tianhai City has been scarred by this battle, and no one knows how many people are left alive. This big city, which once had a population of more than 20 million, is now dead silent. Everyone is tired and doesn't want to fight anymore. Besides, with just a few people like them, there are enough resources to share, and there is no need to steal. With Wei Dinghai's departure also meant that all the forces in the city were trying to win Zhang Yi over. So as Zhang Yi thought of Xingtian, Wei Dinghai, Xiao Honglian, and Zheng Yixin all wanting to win him over. He didn't know whether it was a blessing or a curse. He then silently called Zhou Qir over his communication device and asked her to wait for him in the car. He had something very important to do, and as for the rest, they were to stand guard. And under no circumstance were they allowed to let anyone who comes to find Zhang Yi get close. When Chunlei heard this, he was very happy to please. I will definitely stand guard for you, boss. I will make whoever comes wait. Soon after, Liang Yu, Uncle Yu and Chunlei were guarding the car nearby. Liang Yu's cold face flashed a strange look. She turned her head and snorted coldly. She looked a little uncomfortable. After all, she never imagined that one day she would stand guard for others for such a thing. Uncle Yu, on the other hand, was very open-minded. He smiled and said, "Young people are full of energy after all, so this is understandable. The car has its own sound insulation, so the sounds inside cannot be heard outside." When Zhang Yi got in the car, he quickly closed the door and pulled up the curtains. Zhou Qir was sitting in the back seat in a coquettish manner, with her legs leisurely crossed. Her eyes were full of charm. She blushed slightly when she saw Zhang Yi's serious expression. Then Zhang Yi calmly said, "Qir, there is something very important I need to ask you." Zhou Qir looked at Zhang Yi in surprise, and when she saw that his expression was very serious, she realized that she was wrong with what was about to take place. A hint of embarrassment flashed across her face. "What's the problem?" she asked. Zhang Yi said seriously, "It's about the incident before when I asked you to help me observe Yuan Kongya carefully." Zhou Qir didn't know why Zhang Yi suddenly asked about Yuan Kongya. In her opinion, the snow worship sect was the biggest victim of this battle. Everyone sympathized with them and should not doubt them. But since Zhang Yi asked, she shook her head and replied that there was nothing wrong. She then asked what was wrong. Yuan Kongya only has two abilities, Blessing and Gift, both of which are auxiliary abilities. Blessing can condense ice spirits from her body to help others awaken their abilities or increase their ability strength. And Gift can help people heal physical injuries. But on that night, when the flying bronze-armored corpses came inside the church, someone with ice attribute attack abilities knocked them away through the church's window. I suspect that person was Yuan Kongya. Think back carefully. When you were with Yuan Kongya, did you find anything abnormal about her? Especially when the church was attacked. How did she fight? Zhou Qir tried to recall everything she saw about Yuan Kongya and recount every detail she could remember. Well, she spent most of her time praying and comforting other believers. But if there is anything special, there was one time. She said she could help me awaken my superpowers. A nervous and worried look suddenly flashed in Zhang Yi's face. She said she would help you awaken your superpowers? Did you agree? Zhou Qir smiled and shook her head. No, although I really want to become a mutant, I remember your advice and kept being vigilant to anyone. So I rejected her. Zhang Yi nodded with relief. If you are too nice to someone, you are either a traitor or a thief. Yuan Kongya can't be so kind as to give her precious ice soul to others without a catch. Unless she has some special purpose. Zhang Yi crossed his hands and propped up his chin. The fog in his mind began to become clearer. He vaguely felt that he seemed to have grasped the key to the matter. There was even a very bold idea that was slowly building in his mind. Qir, keep talking. Tell me everything about her in detail. Don't leave anything out. Zhou Qir nodded and continued. After I rejected her, she just said that if I changed my mind, I could go to her at any time. She didn't force me, which made me feel at ease. Later, the two monsters broke through the ceiling and entered the church. Zhou Qir recalled. I was sitting in the first row at the time, so I was very close to Yuan Kongya. I saw her attack very clearly. When the two monsters swooped down, their first target was her. But she was very fast. Yuan Kongya just raised her hand lightly, and the two monsters were frozen in midair. Then, with another wave of her hand, the two monsters were swept away. Even the door of the church was broken. She just waved her hand easily, like she was chasing away mosquitoes. Zhou Qir described vividly, and as Zhang Yi listened, his scalp was numb, and even his back felt a chill. The ability of ice and snow can instantly freeze two powerful bronze-armored flying corpses. The reaction speed is extremely fast, and the physical strength is strong. This is the performance of a strengthening-type mutant. Doesn't it mean that she has at least 4 different abilities at the same time? Zhang Yi figured it out. He figured it out completely. He finally understood why the sect gave the ice soul to him so easily, and it was generously sent to the hands of major forces in Tianhai City. Even using the Great Decree to preach constantly, looking for people with potential and giving them the ice soul. As long as those with the potential for superpowers use the ice soul, it doesn't matter if they don't join the snow worship sect, or even become enemies of the snow worship sect. Because Yuan Kongye's real ability has never been a blessing. It's actually return from death. That is to say, once the mutant who has awakened their superpowers implanted with the ice soul dies, the ability will return to Yuan Kongye's body. In this way, she can have countless superpowers, and it seems that her superpowers are also very strong. During the Battle of the 5 Armies, Zhang Yi found many empty shell mutants without origins on the battlefield. At first, he didn't understand where the superpowers of those people went after they died. Now, he'd finally understood that those people used the superpowers awakened by the ice soul, so their power also returned to Yuan Kongye's body. Then this kind of return can also enhance her own strength. And within a few months after the end of the world, Zhang Yi wondered just how many mutant superpowers she'd secretly absorbed. Not to mention that after several battles, countless mutants in Tianhai City were killed and injured. Suddenly, a bolder idea emerged in Zhang Yi's mind. Could it be that Yuan Kongye was the mastermind behind the zombie riot in Tianhai City? The more Zhang Yi thought about it, the more horrified he felt. If this was true, then the seemingly harmless and devout believer was actually the biggest and most inhumane demon in Tianhai City. And now, even Zhang Yi couldn't imagine how powerful she was. Zhang Yi's face was terribly solemn, and his legs began to tremble slightly involuntarily. This was a sign of nervousness, although these were only his imagination. But once the speculation is verified to be true, it means that he will face an extremely terrifying demon in the near future. Fortunately, this is just a guess for the time being. At least there are some places where Zhang Yi can't justify himself. The first is the zombie tide. If the snow worship sect really has the ability to control so many zombies, then there was no need for them to be suppressed by several major base forces before. Relying on the power of the zombie tide, they could have easily flattened Tianhai City. The second was why? What's the purpose by doing this? As the leader of a sect, she regards herself as the most devout believer of God. What reason does she have to destroy the foundation of her sect? The death toll of the followers of the snow worship sect in these wars can only be described as tragic, and there are almost none left. Without believers, can her sect still be called a religion? I can't figure it out. I really can't figure it out. Zhang Yi was a little confused. He whispered with his eyes closed. He also hoped that he was just overthinking, but all the clues were connected together, forcing him to think so. Zhou Qi came over to comfort him and said, "Zhang Yi, what's wrong with you?" Zhang Yi didn't say anything. He fell into a long silence. That's right, all this was just his imagination. In addition to knowing that Yuan Kongye has many supernatural powers, he has no evidence to prove his guess. Even if he tells anyone this matter, he's afraid no one will believe it. What's more, he doesn't want to alert the enemy now. I hope I'm just overthinking it, Zhang Yi muttered to himself. After Zhang Yi and Zhou Qi finished chatting, he got off the car. Then, he looked at the white Gothic church with a very complicated mood. I really hope I'm just overthinking it, and none of it is true. If the snow worship sect has the ability to control the tide of corpses, there is no need to wait until now to take action. Unless there is a special reason. However, if Yuan Kongye is really the mastermind, why didn't she take action during this period? This seems a bit unreasonable. And looking at her, she doesn't look like she can control the tide of corpses. Chaos. The more Zhang Yi thought about it, the more he felt that the logic of the matter was not smooth. No matter how you look at it, the snow worship sect does not have such conditions and reasons. And Zhang Yi's suspicion only came from the many supernatural powers she showed. The clues are a bit confusing now. I'd better investigate it some more, and in secret too, Zhang Yi thought to himself as he shook his head. At this time, he heard the sound of Bian Junwu coughing not far away. Zhang Yi looked up and saw Wu Di, Bailey Chongqing and the others looking at Bian Junwu nervously, who covered his mouth with a white handkerchief and coughed violently, as if he was going to cough out his lungs. Zhang Yi frowned slightly. Could it be because Yuan Kongye is afraid of the people in Jiangnan district? Zhang Yi felt that he was almost insane. He seemed to be a conspiracy theorist, always looking at everything around him with suspicion. Zhang Yi sighed heavily and threw aside the complicated thoughts in his mind. Then he walked towards Bian Junwu and his team. The people in the investigation team had different expressions on their faces when they saw Zhang Yi. Most of them had a friendly look, because Bien Junwoo once said that he intended to let Zhang Yi join their investigation team. So he has been looking for new members for the investigation team, although there is some overlap between sniping and Qi Guangming. But it is not a big problem to have 2 snipers in a team, not to mention that their abilities in other aspects are also different. Only Wu Di always looked at Zhang Yi with some unkindness. Zhang Yi himself didn't know when he had offended Wu Di, but he didn't like to cause trouble, so he simply turned a blind eye. "Captain Bien, are you all right?" Zhang Yi came over and greeted Bien Junwoo with a concerned look. Bien Junwoo loosened his handkerchief, and Zhang Yi saw the dark red blood inside. He couldn't help but feel moved. Bien Junwoo was indeed seriously ill. It seemed that he had used his ability again in the last decapitation operation, which caused his condition to worsen. Zhang Yi felt a little regretful. Bien Junwoo left a good impression on him. He was a calm, wise leader, and extremely powerful. If it weren't for their help this time, Tianhai City would basically have no chance of solving the zombie crisis on its own. Bien Junwoo said lightly, "As usual, I won't live for a few days." Although he was talking about his own life and death, his expression did not fluctuate at all, as if he had already seen through life and death. Wu Di said with a worried look on his face, "Boss, don't say that. Let's go back to Blizzard City quickly. If you go back for treatment, your injuries will stop getting worse." Bien Junwoo shook his head. He knew his own body well. Although the region had used various means to protect him, a battle-hardened Delta-level mutation itself was irreversible. He had to bear the consequences of using his abilities. Bien Junwoo said to Zhang Yi, "We will make a final conclusion and confirm that there is no Corpse King in Tianhai City, and then we will go back." He suddenly smiled and said, "How about it? Tianhai City is now in tatters. I'm afraid it will be difficult to deal with any natural or man-made disasters in the future. Do you want to consider going back with us? Not only you, but also your friends. Everyone around Zhang Yi is an elite. If they can go to Blizzard City, they can also find a job." Zhang Yi smiled faintly. "I don't have this plan yet, but I may go there in the future." Wu Di snorted coldly. "You are so picky. Do you really think that anyone who wants to go to Blizzard City can go?" Zhang Yi didn't argue with him, but just smiled and said, "I still have some friends here, and Tianhai City is my hometown. I'm used to it, so it's hard to leave." Bien Junwoo didn't force it. "Think about this carefully. With your ability, you should have a bright future." Zhang Yi glanced at the others. Wu Di looked uneasy and always looked up at people. Zhang Yi didn't talk much. He told Bien Junwoo to take care of himself and planned to leave. "Hey, Mr. Zhang, I heard that you are very good. Do you want to spar with me?" Wu Di suddenly called Zhang Yi, staring at him with a provocative tone. Several members of the investigation team looked at him, some with playful expressions, and some with deep thoughts. Bien Junwoo said nothing. He just looked at Zhang Yi, wanting to see how Zhang Yi would respond. But Zhang Yi did not hesitate for a moment, and raised his hands very generously. He knew Wu Di would not stop this meaningless competition of his. So he smiled and said to Wu Di, "Brother, my abilities are limited to shooting from behind and moving supplies, but you are the elite of Blizzard City. Isn't it a bit of bullying for you to pick a fight with me? I'll just admit defeat." Although Zhang Yi didn't know where Wu Di's hostility towards him came from, he wouldn't fight a meaningless fight. Competitive people are most likely to die, and Zhang Yi knew this very well. It's just that when he agrees to fight with someone, it means he wants to kill the other person. But obviously, Zhang Yi won't get any benefit from killing Wu Di, so he chose not to fight. Wu Di didn't expect Zhang Yi to be so cowardly and actually raised the white flag directly. He pointed at Zhang Yi angrily. "You didn't even fight, so how can you just admit defeat? You are the boss of a force in Tianhai City after all. Don't you have any face?" Zhang Yi smiled and waved his hand. "What boss? We are just a few friends who huddle together for warmth, and everyone gives me face and says a word to me. Anyway, I have other things to do, so I'll talk to you later." After that, Zhang Yi left there quickly, not giving Wu Di a chance to respond. Wu Di was puzzled as he looked back at Bien Junwoo. "Boss, this guy is too cowardly. You plan to let him join us? Look at him from head to toe. Where does he fit in?" Bailey Chongqing behind him burst into laughter. Bien Junwoo also smiled. He looked at Wu Di meaningfully and said, "I think highly of him because he is different from you. It would be terrible if everyone in the investigation team was like you.